We're now going to have a panel discussion looking at mining and exploring for those critical energy transition minerals across Africa. And we've got a fantastic panel, a packed panel here for you. We have Dr. Kwasi Ampofo, who's Head of Metals and Mining at Bloomberg New Energy Finance. We have Julian Treger, CEO and Managing Director of Audley Capital. We have Erez Ichilov, who is Managing Director at Traxys. Taiwo Okwor, who is Vice President at African Finance Corporation. Matthew Tilleard, who is co-founder and managing partner at Crossboundary. And Jamie Strauss, founder at Digbee. Okay, let's sort of start things off. We're talking a pretty broad, I think. So, I mean, maybe we could start with Dr. Kwasi. Tell us a little bit about, if you could sort of set the scene about what's the potential out there and where are we at with developing critical minerals in Africa? Where do you see the big opportunities?
Yeah, I think there's just two numbers that I'll probably want to start with, 6 trillion and 10 trillion. According to our analysis, over the next 30 years, the transition metals, if you look at all the batteries, all the wind energy, all the solar, in fact, all the technologies that companies want to build out, we think that there is $1 trillion opportunity there. So that's sort of the headline number. Now, once you break it down and you look at where most of these metals is going to come from, I think we can start. You think about the coppers, you think about the nickel, you think about the cobalt, and the fact that all these are going to record incremental increase in demand, and we have them in Africa. There is a big opportunity. Now, taking it even further upstream in terms of exploration, if you look at the historical profile of exploration, I mean, I would consider Australia, Canada good jurisdictions, but then, of course, nature has its own ways, right? As you mine, your grade declines and your cost of extraction becomes more expensive. And even beyond that, you start going into areas, especially in Canada, where the cost of infrastructure to develop new projects become more expensive. So then where do you start look? You start looking at the global south, particularly in Africa, where we do think that there's still a geological opportunity here. There is still a very youthful population that provides a workforce. And most importantly, we still think that you have the minerals here. And so I think it's a big opportunity. Once again, 6 trillion, 10 trillion in a market that is ripe for the transition.
Absolutely. And as we look at sort of end users for battery minerals on the continent, you've obviously got projections that are showing that in the future Africa's got the fastest growing population. Some of the figures you're seeing there are absolutely huge in terms of the proportion of the world's population that's going to live in the continent. In terms of demand, where are we at with that? And maybe if we go to Matthew on this one, you're someone who uses batteries, battery minerals and critical minerals in Africa. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Crossboundary Energy is a large renewable IPP selling on PPA contracts to mining companies. So we're kind of on both sides here. We are buying the minerals from the people we're selling the power to through the products we buy. And I think what is exciting is just to back up what you just said is the wall of demand that's coming is enormous. There's about 1 terawatt of solar panels installed in the world right now, and the projection is that from this point onwards, it'll be 1 terawatt installed every year, which is 200 nuclear power plants every year worth of panels going in, and you need storage for that. So the batteries are also going to be expanding at an extreme rate, and we're seeing it in our own business a dramatic expansion of demand for renewable power. So I think the demand is there. I think the question is whether the mining industry can fulfill it as quickly as possible, and we're here to provide you with renewable energy while you do it.
Absolutely. Julian, if we could come to you on the end there. You work on projects around the world. You've seen different projects develop in different regions. What lessons do you think could be learned from other countries to apply to African projects to really get things ramped up here?
Thanks, Leo. I think going forward, we're going to have to get much more government involvement, particularly in Africa, to accelerate things. I think in the past, the private sector really carried large weight of development activity. There aren't enough private equity funds around to fund the mines that are going to be necessary. So if we rely upon the existing economic ecosystem in the mining finance space, we're going to fall woefully short of the targets that everybody's talking about, which are vast. So I think the model going forward has got to be much more government-private partnerships, government subsidization. We can see it starting, well, it's already been happening in China for a long time, but now we see it starting in the US, Europe's scrambling to catch up. The UK has no idea. But in Africa, the governments could also play a role, and the parastatal organizations in this continent, to make sure that the end is achieved.
Absolutely. I think this is a good opportunity to bring in Taiwo here. Tell us a little bit about Africa Finance Corporation and where you might be helping to fill those funding gaps.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So the Africa Finance Corporation is a multilateral organization with a mandate to invest and close the infrastructure deficit on the continent. So we are the third largest rated entity, and we've deployed close to $1 billion of investment in the mining space, in precious metals, base metals, and also in battery minerals. So I think to your point about how you can accelerate investment in the battery mineral sector, what we've found is that there's a lack of funding in the pre-development stage. And to your point about accelerating investment and Africa being able to benefit, is providing those early stage capital to really move those projects going. And to just also support Kwasi's point that the fact is that Africa holds about 30% of mineral reserves, and unfortunately, less than 5% of exploratory and development funding goes to Africa. So when you have the likes of the AFC and other institutions like multilateral providing early stage capital to unlock some of those critical projects, I think that's the point where we're going to see acceleration to get those mines going.
I mean, what stage in the development of mine? How early can you invest?
So what we do, we don't do exploration because it's not within our sweet spot. What we found is that stages, like investigative drilling, the PFS stage, DFS stage, to really close the critical gaps that a lot of the sponsors really get stuck to get those projects going. The completion of the critical ESIA reports. Sometimes we get involved in the scoping study. It's really to get projects from that stage to bankability, which makes it more attractive for other financiers and ourselves to play a role.
I mean, we've talked a little bit there about financing the later stages, but how do we get more investment into the early stage? Obviously, we've got a lot of companies here who are listed on the ASX, on the TSX Venture Exchange, on the AIM market in London. Jamie, time for more funding coming directly from in Africa.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think coming back to some of what the others were just saying here, I mean, I think if we look at this, there's a major problem. I mean, we've got a limited amount of funding, yet we've got the OEMs who require to know where their product's coming from. We've got the miners who are being told they've got to deliver a sustainable project. And there's a complete imbalance between the size of the majors who are trading at all-time highs and the juniors, which haven't moved. In fact, they've devalued in the last 12 months. So there's a major imbalance, and I totally agree with you. There's a funding shortage, and to Julian's point, we've got to bring the governments in and others. But everybody requires a sustainable project to be delivered. And any company you stand up here or in any conference, they're all saying they're going to deliver a sustainable project. So there are major kind of imbalances between what is being shown by the markets at the moment. I mean, if you look, there are trillions of dollars being flown around the markets at the moment by the US government and the European government. But that's all, I guess, in grants and loans. And yet there's no equity to release that. So we've got to break this imbalance, and I think ESG is the opportunity of a lifetime. We should stop apologizing. We've been doing ESG in this sector for 25 years. We've got building blocks which are exceptional and probably first class relative to any other sector. So let's stop apologizing and let's break for freedom. Let's deliver this. Let's measure the ESG, and let's raise the confidence. Let's raise the credibility of the mining sector, and get out and communicate this.
I mean, you've jumped straight ahead there to the ESG question. Well, we're talking little bit about the finance at the beginning, but it does, you know, it's so important for investors now to be investing in sustainability. So, Erez, if we could just bring you in here, because I know you had some thoughts on sort of how OEMs should, you know, could get involved and other, you know, offtake and all that sort of stuff with that. In terms of how ESG plays into that, well, if you talk about the OEMs and the offtakes and things like that first, and then how ESG plays into that.
Sure. In Traxys, what we basically do is we build and help operate sustainable supply chains, sort of mine to product, and we try to identify the bottlenecks and help unclog them. So we actually is a good, I think, case study and something that perhaps we can try to not copycat, but to try to follow is what Quebec has done. Where they have abundant water, they have hydropower, they have the minerals, at least the suite of minerals that go into energy transition, and in a smart way, private sector and public sector cooperated there from early stage to create what's now becoming in Bécancour a hub. That will go pretty much all the way conversion of all the salts, of the lithium, the graphite. There's going to be cell manufacturing there, etc. The only thing that they don't have there yet is automotive assembly, but that's it's close enough to market. And I think that there are two things as we work with cell manufacturers, with anode cathode guys, etc. They are very interested in the integrity of supply chain, and they really want to see all the way through where it came from, how it was produced, and how it was delivered. And this is it's not just lip service anymore. It's not just greenwashing or anything like that. It's real. That's the only way to do business in this sector, and that's why we like to say that everything has to happen all at once, and everything like that movie, everything everywhere and all at once. That's what needs to happen. So when you mine, you should already continuously rehabilitate. When you produce, should already continuously recycle. As you are building your processes and as you're building your supply chain, you should already integrate and implement green energy and renewable energy into it, so that you're producing the materials for the ESS using hydropower, for example. Or here you have abundant solar power and so on. They're creating sort of, to some extent, an artificial Bécancour now in Saudi Arabia. They have solar power, so you're going to have desalination. If you have desalination, you have water, you can have electrolysis. Everything is hydrogen ready. So the important thing is this sort of integration of everything on all dimensions, on all layers, and most important, the time dimension. Because what we're seeing in other continents, and Africa is amazingly positioned exactly in the middle to serve the Pan-Atlantic supply chain and the APAC supply chain, plus the fact that it's going to be, the country where you have a young population. In other places, we have shrinking populations, shrinking workforce. This is where the future is. So it can serve both existing sort of regional supply chains, if you will, and it can become a model and a leader in everything that's going forward. So I think, yes, as Julian was saying, I think the invisible arm of the private sector was a little bit invisible in the last, I think, sort of 7 and 8 years, and governments were perhaps a little bit reluctant to take the right steps, or they had other priorities, including health and security and other issues. But now we're reaching a point where this all has to converge and be kind of pushed forward, because when we're talking about bottlenecks that we need to unlock in the, let's say, the Pan-Atlantic supply chain, the vision is that if you create enough midstream conversion capacity, it enables the downstream to locate there, and it opens up the upstream, because if there's someone making wine, someone will go grapes, right? It will push. But I think here in Africa, perhaps the real bottleneck at the moment is on the upstream. And once that happens, it's going to, together with your amazing potential of green energy, roll into midstream conversion for sure, especially with the benefit of good logistics, and by benefit of the market, of the middle class, of the growing population, also into downstream. So 20 years forward, I'm very, very optimistic, I have to say.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say two quick things. First, on the ESG, said usually I tell, I'm a mining engineer. I've seen ESG in the industry, but then it's just quite interesting how all of a sudden when you mention ESG, miners want to shy away. We've been doing this for donkey years. Think about the Asia report, the environmental social impact assessment reports that we have to spend money, tons and tons of money doing, the social license to operate, the community engagement and all that. So ESG is nothing new to mining. So indeed, let's not be apologetic about it. But here's the beauty of it. ESG is also another pathway to access capital for projects. Now let me throw a question to you. How much do you think mining companies raised in sustainable loans last year?
Zero.
Well, that's a start. Anyone? Someone say zero. Any other number? Did I hear 1, 2, 3, 4, $30 billion by the majors? Sustainability-linked loans, $30 billion. Now, that's not much. It's just a few projects out there. But the point I'm making is that if you embrace ESG, there is a pathway to raise finance. So the whole thing about today is about raising money for projects. Embrace it and access that capital. That is number one. Number two, I also want to talk about the changing supply chains and OEMs. If you look at the history of OEMs' relationship with mining companies, it's been on the basis of just in time. If I need the metal, I call the nickel guy, drops it at the factory, and he drops just what I need. But then now, what we've seen in the battery supply chain is that three things are changing the dynamics: scarcity, security, and sustainability. Now let's take scarcity. In an equilibrium world where there is enough for everyone, nobody rushes to get more than they need, right? And a classic example is during COVID, toilet roll in the UK and Australia. In a perfect world, there was more than enough for everyone until people realize there's not enough, so there's a scramble. That is what is happening with critical minerals now. There is not enough, so people are scrambling. So you create a scarcity layer on top of your normal supply chain. The second one is national security. If battery metals is what oil will be in the future, then countries are beginning to realize that they need to attach that national security concern to battery metals, just as they'll do with oil. And as such, you've got countries like Canada and Australia that are limiting Chinese companies from investing in lithium in the country. Mexico has nationalized its lithium. Just last month, Zimbabwe is preventing export of lithium out of the country. So it is becoming a national security concern now. So if you're an OEM in Germany, your traditional supply chain strategy is not going to work because there's scarcity, and then number two, there is national security. And the third one is sustainability. Take the DRC, for example. There are companies that have vowed that they will never touch cobalt in the DRC. They'd rather go to Morocco or Australia or Canada. So once again, once you layer this on top, you realize that it becomes a very complex procurement process. So what do companies do? Now is no more just in time. Initially, they started by going into long-term offtake. Tesla and Glencore will do 5 years, 10 years, not just tomorrow and the week after. And then they realized that even that one is not enough. So they said, all right, why don't I even take equity in a mining company? And the last time the industry saw that was the days of Henry Ford, when Ford actually had rubber plantations to supply rubbers for its tires. We've seen that come back again. GM just announced $600 million in Lithium Americas last week. A couple of months ago, it invested in a nickel mine in Queensland. And even companies are saying that is not enough. What are they going to do? Vertical integration. I mean, Tesla has said it over and over again that it's going to start a lithium mine, but I've learned not to take some tweets serious. But then that could potentially be the future where auto companies actually become miners. So those are the two things I just wanted to add to the panel here. That one, embrace ESG. It provides a pathway to capital. And then on the OEM side, it's not business as usual anymore. You need to get your hands dirty to ensure that you have enough materials to meet your demand.
Thanks. I just want to add one or two comments. Based on what my fellow, distinguished panelists have just said, it seems that the mining industry needs to do a lot more to sell its own story, because mining cuts across every part of, our economic existence, right? Right from, getting out the ground, processing, refinery. It cuts across every areas of our lives. Everything we, purchase, we produce, it all as a result of mining. So I think it's a case of the industry not doing itself enough justice. And the other point I wanted to also add is with regards to raising finance, right? To Kwasi's point, you really need to, as a financier, we always look at ways for you to distinguish yourselves from other projects. So the ESG aspect is so important. The idea of you embracing, ESG and even presenting a compelling case of how you're allocating some of the capital that we're looking to raise from us into ESG-related projects. It's a big tick for us. So that's something I think every junior miner should take away from here as a way to attract more capital.
Two quick comments. Yeah, one is about the OEMs. It's great that they are supporting companies like LAC and some others, but I think in terms of skill set and more kind of a broad-based stimulus to the supply side, if they would have thought themselves more as funds of funds, and they would have seeded and incubated indirectly 100 projects, because we know the odds game, not everyone actually reaches the final, so in terms of private sector stimulating the supply side, if they would have had a bit of a mindset of just, you don't necessarily need direct access to that specific asset, specific mine, as long as D meets P somewhere within reason, then we're okay. S, I mean, and P later, of course. So I think that's one thing, and they haven't gone in that direction, although they have some VC pockets, but it's mostly tech and autonomous, and it's not really, it hasn't really disseminated to actually helping seed a lot of upstream, and so that's on that. The other thing I just wanted to say, I totally agree with you on what you're saying about the. I guess there is, if you take a step backwards, there's a bit of a trust issue between the extractive industries and I guess the population, the people, old and young, for different reasons perhaps. It's but that's where it's at, and I think there's a lot we can do in that respect as an industry. It's very important that we do rehabilitation and tailing projects. We go back and sort of visit all these dumps, and that's where the governments can help by not taxing this, by allowing expedited, depreciation on the capex and so on. So that's one thing. You just sort of remove these cars in a visible way, and suddenly this dump becomes a park, or those type of things I think can sort of help a lot. And going forward, to understand that efficiency is not just economic efficiency, it's total efficiency. Sometimes, in certain circumstances, it doesn't necessarily make sense to replace 20 employees with one machine, if perhaps actually the right thing to do is to feed 20 families and everything that goes around it. So it's a lot more, I think, sort of fine-tuned and complicated, and perhaps ESG, as it's not just these letters, it's really understanding the circumstances and seeing how you can really merge in a trustworthy and a trustful way with those circles, which is the near circle, and then an expanding sort of radius as you go around. And if we can do that as an industry, I think we could probably resolve it. It's just a matter of being consistent. And then all these kids will understand that there's actually a lot of mining in their cell phone when they smile for their TikTok or their Instagram moment or whatever it is. They just, the connection is not there. Or when grandma's in the hospital and someone operates, or, there's tungsten in that thing, and so on and so forth. We haven't been really great at conveying that message. And somehow we have to make mining and processing and extraction and all that sort of cool again. We want people to. We look at this, the mining engineering departments in the U.S. are quite hard to fill. They're struggling to fill the seats, but everyone wants to be an app developer. So we have to do something about that. I'm not sure I have the answers, but it's definitely troubling.
I would have thought that people want to be influencers more.
I think obviously having good ESG is an important box to tick, but there's a much more fundamental problem with our sector, which is that historically it's been predicated upon access to the stock market to finance it. And conferences like this are full of small public companies looking for investors. But the trend over the last 10, 20 years has been for indexation and liquidity. Newcrest is merging with Newmont to create a $50 billion company so that they're going to get more investors. And under $1 billion or even $5 billion now, there's very little money left. So, but that is exactly the sector that requires funding to bring on the new mines that the world needs. So how that paradox is reconciled is really a major question and issue which the world needs to resolve.
Just touch. I think one of the things sometimes with panels is we look at it from our perspective, and some of the mining companies, I think, sometimes don't always understand where some of these investors are coming from. And I think just where I'm looking at this is reputational risk. And reputational risk is such a massive issue, particularly for a lot of the new money that perhaps you're talking about, as well as the OEMs, I'm sure, as well as others. So if you take reputational risk of impact investors, they're allowed to invest. By and large, they're allowed to invest in mining, but they choose not to because the reputational risk is so big. That's going to be $34 trillion, as PwC said, in 2026. And we don't touch any of that in this sector. So the vacuum of money, which I think a number of people have mentioned here, is very valid, but we've got to find that new source of money to replace a lot of the sources that are leaving now. And I think reputational risk is a significant element that we've got to get over, and therefore raising confidence and conviction in this sector on how this sector operates on a day-by-day basis is the most important thing we've got to get over on top of, and ESG can measure that and communicate it.
Yeah, I think I can build on that a little bit in the sense that we have about $220 million of projects. And in some ways, we're a service provider to mines where we're selling them renewable energy electrons. But in other ways, we're an investor. We're putting down, with Rio Tinto, we're putting down $30 million piece of kit with solar and wind and batteries. So we have to do, we are in some ways doing that arbitrage. We're bringing in impact ESG-oriented money, and we're putting that down at a lower cost of capital to provide through the solar power to the mines. And then, but I would also back up your other point, which is that mines should stop apologizing about ESG because we have a diverse portfolio. We've got, companies like Unilever and Heineken, Diageo, AB InBev, that we're selling solar power to. Our best ESG reports back to our investors are the mining companies because you guys have been doing this diligently for a very long time. So I think we're doing that arbitrage now, but it doesn't have to be arbitrage. And I think as the story of the demand, that this wall of demand that's coming and the minerals that will be required to service it, I think the industry has a real opportunity to tell that better.
I'd like to go back a little bit to where Jamie actually kicked off the discussion about ESG there and really obviously triggered something important here on the panel. And if you could just go back and just explain a little bit more about what you think the industry needs to do to really seize that opportunity.
Well, I think a lot of it's been touched on already, but I think simply put, measure, manage, and communicate. Because ESG is it is many things, and we all want to see better impact, et cetera, but ultimately it's a means of communication. And if we can measure it and you can have credibility and confidence within a system, and I talk about ESG generally here, then you can raise that confidence and conviction. And if you can do that, then you can bring on new pools of capital, you can mitigate risk on mine sites, you can lower cost of capital, you can raise valuations. So it's all kind of part and parcel. I guess I brought it in too early on your schedule, but the reality is it connects the dots of finance and ESG and perception and confidence.
Well, having heard then all the other comments from the panel about how ESG can unlock capital, it actually wasn't going too early on it. It should probably have been the first thing on the list. Because clearly, we're talking about a $6 trillion to $10 trillion opportunity here. But as we know, mining has a troubling, troubled image, which needs to change.
Yeah, just as a comment, I think it's probably a lot more risky in terms of safety to be a truck driver or a construction worker than it is to be even an underground miner. If you actually look at per capita per hour, when it does happen, it's obviously very tragic and gruesome, and it's on CNN and so on and so forth. But if you actually annualize it and quantify, we have a pretty good safety record in the industry, actually.
Yeah, and I think I like the point you raised about measure, manage, and communicate. And I always use this really qualitative example. Like, I mean, if you take your mind back 20 years ago and you went on the mining company's website, the imagery there is a burning smelter, some high temperature smelter with some guy in a metal suit trying to take metal out. That to me was the dirty days, right? If you take out your phone and you look at almost every major mining company's website today, the imagery there is a product. We make cities possible. We make civilization possible. It's the cars, it's the turbines, it's the buildings, and all these things. And instantly you realize that the imagery people have about mining begins to change. So that's the communication bit there. The second thing I also want to talk about is a change in customer profile. So there are two ways that ESG is enforced. The policy one, I would not want to spend time on that. The second one is a consumer-led. And here's where it gets interesting. The super cycle we had previously with China. If Chinese company wanted to buy steel to put up a skyscraper, rarely would the steel manufacturer or the skyscraper, the building company, ask whether the steel is ethical, was the iron ore mined in a region where there were no child labor issues. It was never the case, right? Just dump it in, smelt it, and build a skyscraper. Now look at the profile of the demand profile of your energy transition technologies. Take the Norwegian old couple buying an electric vehicle. They are willing to spend an extra $20,000 to save the environment by buying an electric car. Of course, they have the right to ask questions. Where is my cobalt coming from? What is the emissions profile of my nickel? My copper, I want to know how much, or my lithium, I want to know how much water was displaced before that. So instantly, policy kicks in, the European Union introduces what it calls a battery passport. And then the cost, the responsibility, whatever it is passed on to the poor good miner. But then it's just the consumer is evolving. It's just not going to be the Chinese skyscraper builder who doesn't care where the metals come from. People now care about these things. And right from the onset, I think you made a good point that make ESG a part of it. Once you make it a part of the process, right from exploration, it becomes first order. So I think first, really that communication bit is very important, understanding that mining makes civilization possible and it's not just smelting metals. It's about making daily life possible. And the second part, really about understanding your consumer profile, and it's no more the same. So things need to change, but it can only change right from the beginning. And then the cost of add-ons becomes lower and lower and lower.
Do you have any questions at this stage from our audience? Oh.
Not a question, but just two comments. What you were alluding to, I think, with the websites changing from someone, with the fire in a smelter into the product, it's a bigger trend. It's what we call purpose-based investing or purpose-based action, where you sort of elevate yourself from the micro and you ask yourself the purpose of what I'm doing, just like a bricklayer doesn't just lay bricks. He or she build a home or a hospital or whatever it is. What are you doing? I'm building a hospital. Technically, yes, I'm taking bricks, I'm laying them, I'm pouring cement. When you actually do that, whether it's as a producer or as a consumer, it changes the whole concept, and it really gives meaning to all the nitty-gritty of what you're doing, and it enables you to overcome difficulties and hurdles. Another comment that I just wanted to make, and has to do with the government involvement, we haven't spoken about that, but exploration, especially with the juniors, scraping some money for the next exploration campaign in the next season, then running out of money, drilling 2 holes, going again. It takes far too long, and that where governments could actually help is deploying some governmental skills and technologies and access to data, and sharing it with everyone. Because if the superpowers can find each other's missiles 500 meters deep in some little silo and know exactly what's in the warhead, there's no reason why they cannot help our sector by providing a lot more information and a lot more data to save us time and to allow us to, not work for years and years on false positives and rule things out. So that's one thing they can do, and that's where technology comes. And we have quite a few technology companies that are now providing different layers of survey, of AI, of mass correlation analysis. And if we can get from discovery to resource or to reserve in less than 10 years, if we can do it in 2-3 years, and the average I think is pretty much 10 years to have a JORC level or a SAMRAC resource that can then become a PFS or a BFS and a basis for investment and for taking money from the public and funds and so on. If we can squeeze this portion through technology and through a lot of governmental support, I think this could make a difference.
So it was just one other observation I was going to make on the communication side. The one thing that I benefit from is talking to both sides of the equation. And if I can, I hope I talk for other members of this panel who are investors. But one of the things I've heard is don't put a single page of ESG out which just says ESG and we do it brilliantly. It adds no value to the underlying people whatsoever. ESG covers 30 to 35 different topics, and people want to know what you are doing and want to see it in comparison against previous years or whatever. Help the investors to effectively understand and get to the bottom of what you're trying to do and how you're embracing ESG. It's a really important part of the communication thing, and if you can do it succinctly, then that really helps be part of 5 minutes of your 1 hour slot or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't have to be an hour, but add more than just the we do ESG with a green tinge to it, because it just doesn't. It's not adding any value to your story, and so I hear that so often from investors.
So can I add one comment? I'm really glad about the comment you made about the use of technology, because, like I said, I started my introduction as the AFC as a multilateral. But one thing we've realized is that for you to make an impact in this industry, you need to think outside the box. And one thing that we've done and we're looking to do more is to work with technology firms who can actually provide geomapping and resource validation to governments across Africa. So, watch this space. You're going to see more from the likes of AFC working with some few technology firms to help this country identify the resource and essentially contract this exploration stage to development, because it's all about the acceleration and getting these mines to production. So thank you for raising that. I think it's a really great point.
Yeah, I also just wanted to add two things. So technology as well. And, it's really one of the things that could de-risk most of what we've talked about. And I'm looking forward to the day where I can just message ChatGPT or whatever, and then it can tell me where the best cobalt deposit is. But of course, Cobalt Metals is trying to use AI to uncover some of the deposits. I think they're in Zambia now. So technology will play a key role. But another missing link here. Is anyone from the major mining company here? And that's exactly my point. The biggest beneficiary of junior exploration are mostly the majors. But here we are, I've sat behind here, a lot of great, tremendously awesome projects being presented, and the people who ultimately benefit down the line the most, none of them in the room. Yesterday we had a merger of equals. It's just been big companies merging with big companies, merging with big companies. Why? Because over the last 10 years, they fail to invest in exploration. So they wake up to a 10 trillion opportunity, and what does the board do? I'm going M&A, not organic growth. And that's a problem, right? I don't know how I'm going to solve it, but then indeed, we need the majors. Good old days, where you would find almost every major company's chief geologist sitting there taking notes and doing follow-ups after these meetings, but we don't see that anymore, is he?
I would point out, just to be fair to the majors here, we have BHP Explore as our biltong sponsor.
I was actually going to talk to them as the exception, that program. So the exception being Explore, and they've actually started doing some amazing work in getting the juniors under one umbrella to support them. So shout out to them. I don't know if they're here, though, but
I'm not sure they're in the room, but do go and talk to them and enjoy their biltong, because they did come to our London event, and I think they picked up a couple of projects there which they have subsequently invested in. So they're doing some great work there. So what do we do going forward? We've got four minutes left. What are the key sort of things we need to, Julian?
Well, I think with regards to Africa itself, I think we need to get as you say, a more active Pan-African program to provide the accelerators, the support, the infrastructure, and probably it would be great in Africa if they created like a junior exchange which has backing of OEMs and governments and majors. I mean, that's the dream. And then you could really get something very exciting happening on this continent.
It's interesting also, we touched on tech, some technology. Obviously Africa, as we know, young, growing population, growing as a tech hub as well. In countries like Nigeria, really emerging as tech hubs. Opportunities there? Yeah.
I can make a comment on that. I think it goes back to the point about collaboration. So, I mean, what we've also found is that in order to get a number of those projects to development, there is a lack of attractiveness in terms of capital, but there's also lack of skills in terms of capacity as well. So that's where we come in, and also more established players to work with the newbies to get them up to the standard, or where they understand what kind of right studies needs to be done, the essence of understanding, the infrastructure and logistical challenges. Because at the end of the day, Africa has this vast amount of resource, but not every project is bankable or financeable. So at what point do you stop and then realize that maybe this is not the project, or actually collaborate with a major or another institution that will enable another particular project to be able to maximize that output? Absolutely. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I think we could continue this for a long time, unless you've got a very quick thing to say.
That was just my closing comment. So I don't know if we are going to do that.
No, we're sort of running out of time actually. But yeah, if you want to say something, because you've clearly got something to say.
For me, the way forward is a diversified capital market. Almost all projects chasing the same finance. Almost every country in Africa has a sovereign wealth fund or a pension fund, sitting there and doing what? Investing in in real estate. Why don't we diversify that? Take example, you see a Nigerian bank almost everywhere in Africa, simply because there was a time the government decided to commit a portion of its capital to invest in this banking, and now they're dominating. What if 5% of these pension funds are invested in a venture fund that could help exploration and also support upcoming projects? So a diversified capital market will go a long way to unlock Africa's opportunity. Fantastic. Well, the opportunity is clearly there. Any investors in the room, get investing. Any miners in the room, get mining. And we'll, fantastic future for the continent. So thank you very much to our panelists. Big round of applause. Thank you.